This video is sponsored by Squarespace. You can make your own beautiful website or online store with this all-in-one platform. Hi everyone, in this video we are doing a sketchbook session drawing a bunch of wolves, and I think I have neglected wolves for far too long. I feel like it's one of those animals that like a lot of artists draw. It's like a very common animal, but I just for some reason have not really drawn a lot of wolves. I think I draw dogs a lot, but not like specifically a wolf. So for September, the Patreon package is all about wolves, and you'll be seeing a lot of wolf art posted from me soon, like this video. And the sketchbook page will be one of the Patreon prints for September. It will be the sketchbook print. There'll also be a art print of a wolf and a wolf sticker that I will show on the screen. And if you want to grab it, head to my Patreon and pledge before September ends to your chosen tier. There's a sticker tier, a print tier, and a bundle tier where you can get everything. For now, let's just watch this sketchbook session where I drew a bunch of wolves. I had them pre-sketched because sometimes I feel like I sketch better when the camera's not rolling, but I also like to show you the process of the actual sketching. But this time I drew them all and I was like, okay, I need to film this when I color them. And the sketchbook I'm using is the Royal Talons Art Creation sketchbook in like the lilac color. And it has really surprised me over this last year on how well it accepts watercolor. The paper upon like first glance does not seem like it would take watercolor. It doesn't seem like that kind of paper. And I think if you really push it, it might struggle, but with a couple of light washes, I think it is great for watercolor. I wouldn't call it a watercolor sketchbook, but I can make it work for the way that I use watercolor. So I've been pleasantly surprised by that. So maybe this will be one of my new go-to sketchbook brands. I think I say this in almost every video that I use this sketchbook, but people always ask like, what sketchbook is that? So I want to let you know right off the bat, it's the Royal Talons Art Creation sketchbook. For the wolves, I wanted to do a mix of darker wolves and white wolves or like lighter wolves to try to play with the different fur colors that they have and try to depict them. I think it's kind of a challenge for me to draw things that are black or white. Well, the wolf isn't black, but it has like dark colors with browns, and the white has like light colors with browns. And I found that a little bit of a challenge at first, but as I added more and more layers of paint, it sort of started to come together a bit better. Whenever I paint things like this that are mostly like neutral colors and not like super colorful, because like wolves are just kind of like different shades of brown and cream and like black fur, I like to incorporate colors that aren't those colors to sort of make it up. So like when something that's light or like cream or white color is in shadow, it's nice to add some like blue tones to the shadows. When something dark is in shadow, I like to make it more purpley. I just like it to have a colorful feeling, even though it's all neutral colors. I think that just makes things feel a lot more fresh, and it decreases the risk of things getting muddy when you're painting them. Because I think when you're painting with all brown colors, there's a big risk for things appearing muddy. And another way to really help combat that is if you shift the hue you're using as you paint. So don't just use the same brown to color one brown object. You want to like change the color a little bit as you go. Like the brown in the light might be a bit more yellow. The brown in shadow might be a little more purpley or blue. And it's good to just experiment with these different hues and not just use the same color in different like dilutions for shading. I think out of the two colors, the like darker wolves I find way easier to draw than the lighter ones. So that's why I wanted to challenge myself. I think it's easy to just like keep adding color and make it darker and darker, and then it looks like a dark wolf. But for the light ones, if you add too much, it will not look like a cream colored light brown wolf anymore. It will look like darker than you intend. So I purposely tried to hold back for the lighter ones and use lighter colors for outlining and just like be a little bit more careful with them and how I colored them. Another thing that was challenging about this page was drawing wolves, but making them not look like a dog and looking like an actual wolf. So I looked at a bunch of reference photos to kind of see like what are the key features that make wolves look like wolves. And looking at the reference photos, I tried to sort of channel that. What I noticed about wolves is that they tend to be fluffier than dogs, and they have like thicker fur. Like they have these like layers of fur and very fluffy around their head, a lot of fur around there, and their fur sort of forms like a circle around their head, and it's sort of rounded. And comparing that to foxes, fox fur is more like pointed around their head, but wolves, it's more like rounded. And I also noticed that there's a lot of space between their eyes and their ears. It's sort of like their forehead is quite large because it is so fuzzy, and their ears are like rounded, and there's just a lot of fur. So I tried to make sure that these didn't look like dogs, that they definitely looked like wolves. And I think making them have like a more defined snout and like more angular, sharp features in their face and like teeth and stuff like that makes them look more wolf-like rather than dog-like. Now for a quick break to thank this video's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Have you been wanting to make a website or maybe a portfolio or an online shop? Squarespace is a really great place to do this. I use Squarespace to build my website, and it's where I showcase my portfolio and a quick about section. And a great thing about Squarespace is that you can also link off to all of your different social media sites. They have a section where you can paste all of your links in to YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Squarespace will automatically put the corresponding icon of the social media site on your website so that you don't have to hunt them down yourself. They do it automatically. And then whenever someone visits your website, they will know where to find you on social media. If you'd like to get started, there are a lot of flexible website templates that you can choose as your starting point and then build it up from there. You can customize a lot of aspects of the template to make it fit your brand. If you'd like to get started today, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/JelArts and you can get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. They really help me continue to do what I love. And for the watercolor, the way I used it in this video is I start off by dropping down bits of color around the entire sketch. And I usually do it in 2 to 3 layers. So the first one, I'm just sort of like defining the general areas of shading and the colors that I want. And I tried to not be afraid to have it be too dark or too saturated. I find when you drop in, like the more decisive you are when you're first laying down the watercolor, I find it tends to look nicer in the long run, because if you're a little too timid and you're just sort of like doing very light glazes and slowly building up the color, sometimes it just doesn't look as decisive or loose when I do watercolor. So I like to drop down color, be a bit decisive, but leave some room for further layers to add some more details as I go. I like to let the first layer sort of blend with each other. I sort of do a mixture of wet on wet and wet on dry. Sometimes I will wet the entire sketch and then drop colors in if I'm going for a really soft look. But for these, I went wet on dry, so I just dropped down colors. And then within the colors that I already dropped down, sometimes I'll add hints of other colors so it will sort of blend and form a gradient. And I find when the watercolor, after it has been sitting on the page for maybe like 10 seconds, I try to not touch it because you can kind of mess with the way it dries if you touch the watercolor too much. And if you try to blend it while it's like in the process of drying, you'll end up introducing color that is wetter than what is currently on the page. And then it sort of like has this weird bleed effect that you might not have intended. But it really depends on what your intentions are with how it's going to look. And I'm always wondering like how much white space should I leave, because sometimes I think watercolor sketches look pretty cool when you have some white space left. It just gives it a more like sketchbooky feel and loose feel, a more like casual look to it because you're not filling in every single piece of white paper. But then I'm like, does it look unfinished? But then I'm like, it's not really finished because it's just a sketchbook page. So I'm just trying to let myself do what I thought looked good and what I felt was natural. With this wolf, you can see how I started off by doing the orangey brown on the ears, and then I sort of filled in the entire face with a slightly lighter brown, but I let the lighter brown blend into parts of the orange, and you can see there's like a splotch there. I actually don't mind the way that looks, but that's sort of what can happen when you mix areas that are like half dry and then you add on to it. It'll like completely bleed into it. And certain watercolors bleed more than others. The ones that I'm using in this video are called the Shinhan Professional Watercolors. It's like Shinhan PWC, and I really like them. They're kind of opaque and very easy to use, very pigmented. They come off the palette quite easily. I have a different type of watercolor, a different brand. It's from the Schminke watercolors, Schminke Horadam watercolors. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of that, but I find those bleed into each other a lot more. For these Shinhan ones, when two colors touch, they don't fully go into one another. They bleed a little bit, but it's like a lesser degree than the other watercolors, the Schminke ones. those ones bleed into each other a lot more easily. And I think that's because they are way more translucent. So it's like they're not as heavy and it flows a bit more freely because you have more water in the paint. So there are different kinds of watercolors. So if there's one that isn't working for you, I'd recommend trying a different type. Look up what the most popular watercolors are, what people recommend. I know there's like Daniel Smith ones that seem to be really good. There's a lot of options, but these ones I just found in a local art shop that was close to me, and they were pretty inexpensive for the size. And when I got them, they were such an upgrade from the Winsor Newton Cotman watercolors that I had been using. I can't go back to using those anymore because I find them quite chalky. I don't find these ones chalky at all. They are a little bit more opaque than some other watercolors. Like I wouldn't call these that translucent, but I sort of like that style of watercolor. I like working that way. Probably because I just like these paints so much. The tubes have lasted me quite a long time. I bought them open stock and I just picked a bunch of colors. And I think like earlier this year or last year, I got a bunch of other colors like a sap green and some like more purples and oranges, and it just makes it easier when I'm mixing colors. I don't need to do it all from scratch. But there is something to say about using a limited color palette where you have just the primaries and you only paint with those, because sometimes when you start to mix a bunch of colors together that are all like different shades and you don't mix your own colors, you're using like pre-mixed colors more. I don't just use like pre-mixed colors completely. Like I won't just go to the pan, take a color and put it on my painting. I will mix them to an extent, but it's easier when you have an orange already mixed and you don't have to mix it from red and yellow. So I can take the orange and add something else to it to modify it to the color I want and then add it to the painting. But sometimes it can look, it can be a little more cohesive if you're mixing all the colors from less colors. Like the more limited palette approach is totally a valid option. You don't need all these colors because sometimes it hinders you more than helping you because you end up having too much choice or like too many things are pre-mixed. So it might start to look monotonous because all your colors start to look more similar because you're like starting off points. You have more starting off points for colors that you're trying to mix, if that makes any sense at all. I don't know why that's so hard to explain for some reason. I'm now painting a lighter wolf and I was like wanting to add some shadows, but since it's lighter, I didn't want to go in too hard and make it look like a darker colored wolf. I wanted this one to be lighter. So I tried to be very careful. I tried to incorporate some blues into the shading, and I really like adding in shadows of fur and then leaving behind lighter fur that is unpainted. So it sort of has this line between the two shades and it forms that piece of fur. I think it looks pretty cool. After doing all the watercolor, I took out my pencil crayons. I use a mixture of Prismacolor Premier pencils and Faber-Castell Polychromos. I also used a brush pen from Tombow. It's one of my favorite brush pens. It's always linked in my art supplies list in the description because I use it all the time when sketching. And some of these sketches I did a lot of black brush pen to outline them, to add details here and there, but other ones I mostly used pencil and not much brush pen. I think it gives two very different looks when you outline it with brush pen because it sort of flattens it more and it's nice to add the details. It gives it an inky look and you can really like go in and make things very defined. But I find using pencil, it takes a little bit longer because you have to sharpen it and you have to like deal with pressing hard with the pencil and it can hurt your hand a little bit more because I don't really have the best posture when drawing with pencils like that. But with pencils, I find it can almost look better if you're patient enough for that. And today, some of them I wasn't patient enough, but others I was. So I think for the white wolves, I used, well, they're not like white, but you know, the lighter colored ones, the cream ones, I used pencil to do the outlines. And for the darker ones, I used black. And I think it really lent itself nicely. Especially for this one like angry looking wolf, I think the black outlines just really added to the emotion of the wolf. It was nice to put its eye into shadow and to just like add a bunch of dark details and hatching and lines. So that part was really fun. And then for the other ones, I was like, I want a softer look for these because they are lighter colored, and I decided to go with pencil. And I don't remember if I used any brush pen for the lighter ones. I honestly can't really remember if I did. And whenever I'm doing these little details added on, it's hard to not go overboard. I find I have to sort of step away from it a lot and like look at it from a distance and force myself to take pauses to see like, do I need to put a line here? I don't need to outline the entire thing just because I can. This is just to assist in making certain details pop more and like carving out the shape of the sketch. Another thing that pencils are good for, not just outlining, but to add texture and to actually use light pencils to go on top of dark watercolor, because you can lighten areas in a soft way without having to use gouache or like acrylic markers or things like that. You can use a lighter pencil because the Prismacolor Premier ones are quite soft, so they can actually go over top of things quite opaquely, in a quite opaque way. So they're really good for that. And the Faber-Castell ones are a little bit harder, not as soft as the Prismacolor Premiers. So they are good for the finer details and like smaller areas where you need some more precision. The Prismacolor ones are good for like adding washes almost over top of areas, or like areas where it would be difficult to get a color to show up. The Prismacolors are good for that. All these little wolf sketches that are a little bit less detailed are just like little ones I just wanted to do in a quick way to see if I can do it like very quickly and simply without like going into so much detail, just to like fill out the page a bit. And then on to the next white wolf. I had a lot of fun coloring in the lighter colored ones because I got to use my pencil crayons, and I think they just have a really nice soft look to them because that's just what pencil crayons do. They just are way softer than harsh ink, and I think both have their uses for sure. As you see in this video, the darker ones I use brush pens for the details, and the lighter ones I use pencil crayon. But for this one, I decided to not use brush pen for the details because I feel like I did a good job in the watercolor stage of like defining the whole shape of the wolf. Like there wasn't any clarifications needed for the brush pen. I just needed to take some pencils and just like render it a little bit more and like highlight certain areas of the fur, add lines here and there, but I didn't have to like go over the whole thing with brush pen to make it readable, like more readable than it is. But one thing I did do, it was use my Artex acrylic markers that I got a while ago. They sent them to me a long time ago. And I break them out every once in a while when I'm sketching because it's a really easy way to add opaque mark making on top of your sketches without having to break out a bunch of paints and a palette and like mix a bunch of colors. The one downside is that there are a limited number of colors available, but if you can find one that fits your sketch, it's very convenient to just go in and add a little details here and there. Like I found this one brown color that matched a lot of the browns I was going for in this particular sketch. And I used some of the lighter colors to add light highlights of fur here and there. And it's just really fun to break these markers out. So far they're holding up pretty well. The brush nib is flexible and it goes to a point. So it's very easy to get small areas and large areas. This is not sponsored at all. Like this is not gifted or sponsored for this video. I've already done that on Instagram, but I just thought I would talk about these markers that I genuinely like. Yeah, I'd recommend getting a set of acrylic paint markers, whatever brand it may be. There's also Posca. I think there's a lot of new ones coming out these days. It'd be cool to do like a big video where I compare a bunch of them, but I don't know if brands are into being compared with one another. Like I'd probably have to fund it myself, but that would be a pretty interesting video idea. Anyways, back to the sketches. I don't know if I overdid it with that one, but overall I'm really happy with all of these. It was just so much fun to draw wolves. I totally get it. Like I get why people like wolves. I like wolves. They're basically just like really edgy dogs, but also like super cute at the same time. I had so much fun drawing them. I hope you enjoyed watching me draw them, and make sure to check out my Patreon if you'd like to grab a print of this page. It'll be a compilation of some of these scanned and printed out, as well as this print and sticker for the month of September. If you like wolves, now's the time to join my Patreon. You can join, upgrade, leave at any time. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in my next one.